Emily Harper was a typical high school senior on the surface. She was the star cheerleader, always the center of attention at Oakwood High School. With her blonde hair and dazzling smile, she embodied the American dream. But behind the scenes, Emily carried a secret that would shake her seemingly perfect life to its core. That secret was her affair with Coach Mark Andrews. Mark was a well-respected figure in the community. A former college football star, he had returned to his hometown to coach the high school team. At 39, he had a wife and 2 kids and by all appearances, a stable life. Yet, behind closed doors, his marriage was falling apart, and Mark found himself feeling increasingly disconnected from his family. That's when Emily entered the picture. The relationship began innocently enough. Mark praised Emily for her hard work during practice, often giving her extra attention. Emily, in turn, admired the coach's authority and charisma. Soon, their conversations moved from the football field to private text messages, and before long, the relationship took a darker turn. They started meeting in secret, under the cover of darkness, hiding their affair from everyone around them. For a while, Emily and Mark felt invincible. But the excitement of sneaking around soon gave way to paranoia. Emily started to feel guilty about the lies she was telling her friends and family. Mark, on the other hand, was terrified of what would happen if anyone found out, especially his wife. He feared losing his career, his family, and everything he had worked for. But secrets like these don't stay hidden forever. It wasn't long before rumors started circulating around Oakwood High School. Students noticed that Emily seemed to be spending a lot of time with Coach Andrews, more than was normal for a student and coach. Whispers spread like wildfire through the halls, and it wasn't long before Emily's best friend, Rachel, confronted her. "Is something going on between you and Coach Andrews?" Rachel asked one day after practice. Emily denied it, of course. She insisted that they were just close because of cheerleading, that Coach Andrews was simply helping her with college applications. But Rachel wasn't convinced, and neither were the other students. Meanwhile, Mark's wife, Jessica, had also begun to suspect that something was wrong. She noticed how distant her husband had become, how he spent more time at school and less time at home. She found strange text messages on his phone, messages that didn't seem appropriate for a teacher to be sending a student. When she confronted him, Mark brushed it off as professional communication. But Jessica wasn't satisfied with his explanation. She started digging, and soon enough she found out the truth. Furious, she demanded that Mark end the affair immediately, or she would expose him. But Jessica wasn't satisfied with his explanation. She had always been intuitive, and over the past few months she had noticed subtle changes in Mark's behavior. He had become distant, less attentive, and more secretive. His phone was always face down, and his work-related excuses were becoming more frequent. Late nights at school, canceled family dinners, and sudden trips out of town, it all felt too convenient. Determined to uncover the truth, Jessica started digging. She began with his phone. Late one night, when Mark had fallen asleep, she quietly crept out of bed and took his phone from the nightstand. Her heart pounded as she unlocked it using his passcode, which he hadn't changed yet. She knew this was a betrayal of trust, but her gut was telling her that something was very wrong. At first, she found nothing suspicious. The messages between Mark and his students were mostly professional, but then, as she scrolled through the chat history, she found a string of messages that sent a chill down her spine. They were from Emily Harper. The messages were subtle at first, just exchanges about cheerleading practice and school events. But as Jessica read further, the tone of the messages changed. There were late-night conversations filled with compliments and inside jokes that no student and teacher should be sharing. Her suspicions grew with every message, and finally she came across a photo, an innocent picture of Emily smiling, but it was the timestamp that shocked Jessica. The photo had been sent at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. The conversations from that point on were filled with flirty undertones and, eventually, intimate confessions. Jessica felt sick to her stomach. Her worst fears were confirmed. Her husband was having an affair with a high school student, their star cheerleader. Furious and betrayed, Jessica confronted Mark the next morning. She was shaking as she held up the phone, the messages between him and Emily on full display. "How could you do this?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "She's just a child. You're her coach, her teacher. How could you betray me like this?" Mark was caught off guard, his face pale with guilt. He tried to deny it at first, stumbling over his words, but Jessica wasn't buying it. She had the proof and there was no way out. "I'll go to the school board. I'll go to the police if I have to," Jessica threatened. "End it or I'll ruin you. I'll expose everything." Mark was terrified. The thought of losing his family, his career, and his reputation was too much for him to handle. He promised Jessica that he would end the affair, that he would cut all ties with Emily and try to make things right. But deep down, Jessica knew it wouldn't be that simple. The damage had already been done, and she wasn't sure she could ever trust him again. After the confrontation, Mark tried to go back to his normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. He avoided Emily at all costs, keeping their interaction strictly professional, but it was obvious that she was heartbroken. She sent him desperate messages, pleading for an explanation, asking why he had suddenly distanced himself from her. Mark ignored them, knowing that any response would only make things worse. At school, the tension between them was palpable. Emily tried to act like everything was fine, but her friends noticed the change in her behavior. She became more withdrawn, her usually bubbly personality replaced by a quiet sadness. She confided in Rachel, her best friend, but couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth about her relationship with Coach Andrews. Instead, she said that she was going through something personal and couldn't talk about it. Rumors continued to swirl around the school. The whispers about Emily and Coach Andrews grew louder, and soon even the teachers were starting to talk. The school administration called Mark in for a meeting to discuss the rumors, but he denied everything. He claimed that he had a professional relationship with all of his students and that the rumors were just baseless gossip. But Jessica knew better. She watched as Mark struggled to keep up the facade, and every time she looked at him, she was reminded of the betrayal. Their marriage, once strong and full of love, had turned into a cold, distant partnership. Jessica no longer trusted him, and Mark no longer felt like the man he used to be. The pressure was too much for Mark to handle. His guilt weighed heavily on him, and the fear of being exposed consumed his every thought. He knew that if anyone found out the truth, his life would be over. But despite his best efforts to end things with Emily, she wouldn't let go. She continued to send him messages, begging him to meet her, to talk to her, to give her some kind of closure. Mark was torn. He didn't want to hurt Emily, but he also didn't want to lose everything he had. He ignored her for as long as he could, but one night he finally gave in. One evening, after weeks of avoiding Emily, Mark received a text from her. She was waiting for him at their usual meeting spot in the park on the outskirts of town. She told him that she needed to see him, that she couldn't handle the silence any longer. She promised that it would be the last time, that she just needed to say goodbye. Against his better judgment, Mark agreed to meet her. He told himself that it would be quick, that he would end things once and for all, and that he could finally move on with his life. But when he arrived at the park, things didn't go as planned. Emily was sitting on a bench, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. She looked up as Mark approached, her eyes red from crying. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why are you doing this? I thought you cared about me." Mark sat down next to her, his heart heavy with guilt. "I do care about you, Emily," he said softly. "But this has to stop. It's wrong and it's going to ruin both of our lives." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't care about that. I love you, Mark. I don't want to lose you." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're young, Emily. You don't know what you're saying. This isn't love. It's something else, something we shouldn't have let happen." But Emily wasn't listening. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "I'm not going to let you throw me away like this. You promised me that we'd be together, that you'd leave your wife for me." Mark's heart raced. He hadn't realized how deep Emily's feelings for him had become. He had never intended for things to go this far, but now he was trapped. This wasn't how he had imagined things would go. He wanted to give her closure, to leave on peaceful terms, but Emily wasn't about to let him walk away that easily. "I never promised you that, Emily," Mark said firmly, trying to keep his voice calm. "I care about you, but I can't do this anymore. I'm married, and this relationship, it can't continue. You need to move on." Emily's face twisted with anger. "Move on?" she spat. "You think you can just throw me away like I'm nothing? Like I don't matter?" Her voice grew louder, more frantic. "You're the one who started this. You're the one who made me believe we had something real." Mark stood up, trying to keep his composure. "Emily, please," he said, his voice shaking. "This isn't healthy for either of us. I never meant to hurt you, but I have to fix things with my family. We need to end this now." But Emily wasn't backing down. Her emotions were spiraling out of control, and the hurt in her eyes had turned to fury. "If you leave me, I'll tell everyone," she threatened. "I'll tell your wife, the school, the police. They'll know everything and you'll lose everything. Your job, your family, everything." Mark's heart sank. He could feel the walls closing in on him. He had underestimated Emily's feelings, and now he realized just how far she was willing to go to keep him. The panic rising in his chest was unbearable, but he knew he had to stay strong. He couldn't let her control him like this. "You wouldn't do that," Mark said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It'll ruin your life too, Emily. Think about your future. You're young, you still have so much ahead of you. Don't throw it all away for this." But Emily wasn't thinking clearly. Her emotions were raw, and all she could see was the man who had promised her something more, now abandoning her when she needed him most. She took a step closer to Mark, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "If you leave me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Mark's stomach churned. He had no idea what to do. He couldn't lose his career, his reputation, his family. But staying with Emily wasn't an option either. He needed to find a way out, and fast. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said quietly, backing away from her. "But I can't do this anymore. Goodbye." Without waiting for her response, Mark turned and walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back, though he could hear Emily sobbing behind him. The sound of her crying echoed in his ears, but he kept walking. He had to end this. He had to move on. But as he left the park, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Emily's threat hung over him like a dark cloud, and he knew she was capable of doing something drastic. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he wasn't sure if he could fix it. Over the next few days, Mark tried to focus on repairing his marriage, but Jessica wasn't making it easy. The trust between them was shattered, and every time she looked at him, Mark could see the pain and anger in her eyes. She hadn't told anyone about the affair, but the tension in their home was unbearable. Mark threw himself into his work, hoping to distract himself from the chaos in his personal life. But at school things weren't much better. Emily avoided him, but the whispers among the students grew louder. It seemed like everyone was talking about the rumors, and Mark was constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. Then one afternoon, Mark received a message that made his blood run cold. It was from Emily. "I can't do this anymore. If you don't talk to me, I'm going to tell everyone the truth." Mark's hands shook as he read the message. He had ignored her texts and calls since their last meeting, hoping that she would eventually let go, but it was clear that Emily wasn't going to stop. She was threatening to ruin everything, and Mark didn't know what to do. He considered going to the school administration and coming clean, but he knew that would destroy his career. He thought about telling Jessica, but the look in her eyes when she found out about the affair was enough to make him think twice. He couldn't bear the thought of losing everything: his job, his family, his reputation. Desperate, Mark decided to meet Emily one last time. He told himself that he would reason with her, convince her to stay quiet. He couldn't let her destroy both of their lives. They agreed to meet at the same park where they had last seen each other, late at night when no one else would be around. Mark was nervous, his mind racing with possibilities of how the conversation would go. He hoped he could convince Emily to see reason, to move on and leave the past behind. But when he arrived at the park, things took a dark and unexpected turn. As Mark approached the bench where Emily was sitting, he could feel the tension in the air. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "You came," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't think you would." Mark sighed, sitting down beside her. "Emily, we need to talk." But before he could say anything more, Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small knife. Mark's heart stopped as he saw the glint of the blade in the moonlight. "I can't live without you," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And if I can't have you, then no one can." Mark stood up, backing away slowly, his mind racing. "Emily, put the knife down," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We can talk about this. You don't have to do this." But Emily wasn't listening. She was too far gone, her emotions controlling her every move. In a fit of rage and despair, she lunged at Mark with the knife, her screams echoing through the empty park. Mark tried to defend himself, but in the chaos, the knife plunged into his side. He stumbled back, gasping in pain as he fell to the ground. Emily stood over him, her hands shaking, the knife still in her grip. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what she had done. "Oh my God. Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But it was too late. Mark's vision blurred, and he could feel the life slipping away from him. His last thoughts were of his wife, his children, and the life he had ruined. Emily dropped the knife, her body shaking with sobs. She fell to her knees beside Mark, begging for forgiveness, but there was nothing she could do to undo what had happened. The news of Mark Andrews' death shook the entire community. At first, the police believed it was a random act of violence, but as they dug deeper into his personal life, the truth began to unravel. Emily Harper was arrested and charged with murder. During her trial, the details of their affair came to light, shocking everyone who knew them. Emily's defense team argued that she had been emotionally manipulated by Mark, a man in a position of power, but the prosecution painted her as a jealous and unstable young woman who had committed a heinous crime out of obsession. The trial was a media sensation, and the courtroom was filled with reporters and spectators eager to hear every sordid detail. Jessica Andrews, Mark's widow, sat in the front row, her face a mask of grief and anger. She had lost her husband, and now she had to relive his betrayal in front of the world. In the end, Emily was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to prison. But the scars she left behind would never fully heal. The small town where they lived would never be the same. The affair between the cheerleader and the coach became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily lives could be destroyed by secrets and lies.